Hello and welcome to the first episode of No Franchise Fatigue presents The Good, the Bad, the Weird, the Wild, a series of podcasts dedicated to a particular cinematic artist where we pick out 4 films from their filmography to discuss and debate. One film for the good, one film for the bad, one film for the weird, and a last film for our wild card pick. Once again, I'm joined by my ever so bearded co-host, Sean Caylor. How you doing tonight, good sir?
All good. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing good. I'm really excited for this first episode of the show. And, I think for me, when we were kind of discussing this and kind of looking at different artists to start off with, I'm really excited to talk about this artist because he is a rather controversial figure in the genre cinema world. He's got a relatively short filmography as a director, but so much material to debate and discuss. So I think this is why we ended up choosing Rob Zombie.
Rob Zombie, born Robert Cummings in 1965, he burst onto the music scene in the mid 80s with his band White Zombie. After breaking off solo with his album Hellbilly Deluxe in 1998, an album that remains in my personal rotation to this day, he decided to break off into filmmaking as well, writing and directing House of a Thousand Corpses in the year 2000, though it did not release until years later. With a bold personal style, both musically and cinematically, Zombie is definitely a divisive voice in entertainment, but also one who's impossible to ignore.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, my personal experience with Rob Zombie started with music. I was also a White Zombie fan myself, coming into it. And songs like More Human Than Human, and certainly his inclusion, particularly in video games like Twisted Metal,
Mm.
was a huge part for me.
They did "I'm Your Boogeyman" for the Crow City of Angels soundtrack, which was a huge. The Crow franchise was huge in my childhood for
Oh
me.
yeah. Oh yeah. The Crow. Same here. Same here. The Crow is great. Yeah. I'm Your Boogeyman is a fantastic song. And when he decided to leap over into film, I was all about it. I was there for House of a Thousand Corpses. I bought in. I loved his music video direction, his homages to classic horror, with kind of a new, weird, punky version that's a modern slab of interpretation of that old style. I think is really interesting to discuss. And as we kind of get into the choices that we've made, I'm sure you and I will hotly debate the relevancy
Mm.
of what his style is and what that looks like. I think we should why don't we just jump right into it?
And
And
and start with what is your good?
yeah, so my choice for the good is going to be one of his more widely overlooked films, I think, by fans, and that's The Lords of Salem. And the reason I choose The Lords of Salem is I truly think that it is the first film where his hand as a director is steady and intentional with everything that he does. The tone, the Roman Polanski influence is worn on its sleeve. Like even like the patterns in the hallway of the apartment, has that Kubrick feel. There's a touch of Mario Bava in there, but that Roman Polanski feel, that apartment horror that Polanski kind of made popular back in the day, he ably projects right onto the film, and his lack of trying to write quotable dialogue and intentional use of atmosphere versus like throwing everything against the wall to see what sticks really works for me. And it's a film that every time I watch, I I love it a little bit more.
So for me, the good, and in my case, I definitely think his best would be Devil's Rejects.
Yeah, I thought that would be yours. I figured that was going to be yours.
Not just his best movie, not just probably my favorite horror movie, but one of my favorite movies, period. I love this movie. It is so grimy and dirty. I feel the physical need to shower after watching it. And that's just the aesthetic, not even getting into the story or characters. It is a complete horrifying immoral mess, and it is an unblinking look at human evil. And I've always appreciated it because it doesn't make these characters heroes. It doesn't even try to pretend they're good people. It actually, jumping into the comparison game, if anything, it reminds me of Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, in
Oh.
that it's a completely unflattering look at them, but they're very compelling characters too. And, special mention, just because I have to, of Captain Spaulding asking the kid why he's afraid of fucking clowns is like one of the great moments in cinema.
Where he tells him, he's like, you better have a good reason or I'm going to kill your whole fucking family. It's such a great line.
So
And
in Sid Haig is just a national treasure.
well, and I think that brings up a good point. In 2 points for the Devil's Rejects, I think you're absolutely right. It's an unblinking and unflinching film where there is no real heroes, right? The police officer that's chasing them is just as awful as they are.
Yep.
And it's interesting because it also going back to the Lords of Salem, and why I chose that for the good is that the Lords of Salem for me was the one film where the protagonists and the people that are involved in it, the three hosts of this radio show, are are honestly good people and they're trying to do good things. And none of his other films feature that. And I think The Devil's Rejects doubles down on how there is no good. Even when they're nice to each other, when the Tutti fucking Fruity scene
Fruity, yeah.
where they're going to
Just
get ice cream.
visible at all times, yeah.
Yeah, it's when they're going to get ice cream, you see this like weird family dynamic that you kind of appreciate, that for as messed up as they are in this like weird family dynamic, that you almost start to care for them.
Yeah.
And you feel bad for caring for them. And I think I do agree that's probably the best part about The Devil's Rejects.
I actually liked Lords of Salem. I do know that's a divisive movie, but I've always actually kind of felt like it was almost a Lost Argento movie because you could put that in with the Three Mothers and it would fit, especially with the use of music and how that's actually a primary driver in the film.
Right. And it's interesting because like a lot of his other films, and I'm sure we'll talk about this more and more, a lot of his films use music in really interesting ways, whether it's the finale for Devil's Rejects with
Oh,
Freebird.
absolutely.
And you're like, Freebird is a great song, but it oftentimes is an overused song in a lot of ways to reflect like an epic or something like that. And yet that film uses it really well.
There are very, very few directors who can use lyrical needle drops with any degree of efficacy, and Zombie is one of them. He is very good at it, actually.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think his use of music is fantastic, and Devil's Rejects does it well. I mean, it helps he has a really deep knowledge of a lot of 1970s music, and one of my problems with his films in general as a filmography is that he places all of them in the 1970s, and that aesthetic as time wears on it wears thin on me, which was something I liked about Lords of Salem being a little bit more of a modern film also. So
Yeah, interesting.
yeah.
All right, so let's move on to the bad. I feel like I may have the controversial choice here, but ironically, I loathe his first film, House of a Thousand. I like hate this movie. I appreciate it bringing a zombie as a director, but yeah, his characters are interesting, which obviously leads into my love of Devil's Rejects being a sequel to this. But at the same time, it is just a slightly more depraved take on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And the only strength of the movies in some of its imagery, because Zombie does have a distinctive eye, and he definitely was defining his look, but the pace of this movie is crap, and the ending is unadulterated crap. They just drop in this monster Dr. Satan out of fucking nowhere. And it's just really, it has always been a weirdly infuriating movie for me personally.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And partially it's fantastic because House of a Thousand Corpses actually sits on my wild card choice.
Interesting.
Yes. And what's funny about that as a wild card choice is that I can't disagree with anything you just said. I think that House of a Thousand Corpses is 3 films blended together in a blender. Each act is like its own genre of film. The finale going full Italian cinema. You mentioned the Argento reference earlier. I think the use of colors and the use of like nightmarish things with the rabbit suits. None of it makes a lick of fucking sense.
Not even a little.
Nothing in this movie makes sense for House of a Thousand Corpses. And for whatever reason, a part of me still enjoys it for that. There's a rawness and an energy to that movie that has always appealed to me from day one as a interpretation of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre in a very Rob Zombie style. I think the film also benefits from having, at the time when I first saw House of a Thousand Corpses, as I mentioned before, big fan of the music. I was all aboard House of a Thousand Corpses. I've also grew up on cult cinema.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that he was able to get people like Bill Moseley or Sid Haig, or you'll see an early role for Walton Goggins shows up as the deputy in that movie.
Story, my favorite TV show of all time is The Shield. So I went into that as a fan of Walton Goggins already.
Oh, see, and I didn't know him at the time. I didn't really realize who he was until Justified.
He is 1,000% the best part of that movie. That scene with him and the other cop trying to go through the house is actually like really pretty good. That's a pretty tense sequence.
Well, and I think you're right with the Devil's.
Necessarily fault the tension, because the fact of the matter is the man has an encyclopedic horror knowledge, especially of the era of 50s to 70s.
Oh, absolutely. And his ability to pull in, and every one of his films has stunning casts, and House of a Thousand Corpses is one of those. For a first film, that's really interesting. He's able to pull off getting some of the people he did, and some early roles like Walton Goggins. Rainn Wilson shows up in an early role for him. So it's really interesting in that, but I like the energy behind it. So that's really funny that you put that as the bad, and I cannot disagree. I rewatched that movie a couple days ago, and I thought to myself, this is a terrible fucking movie, and I still love it for whatever reason. So jumping ahead, that is my wild card pick, and so I was glad to talk a little bit about that with you. So my choice for the bad is my choice for the bad, not because it's his worst movie. In fact, I think it's his second to worst film. But my choice for bad is 31.
Wow. Okay.
Yes. All right. So let me crack my knuckles here. 31. The reason I think 31 is a bad film, in my opinion, is because 31 was him doing a rubber band snapback after Lords of Salem did not do what they thought it was going to do.
That's fair.
He did something new, something interesting with Lords of Salem. Again, that was my pick for the good. And when the film didn't do very well in theaters and didn't do much to earn its budget back, I think he had to go back to his old style for a variety of reasons, to appease fans, to appease producers, things like that, to get the money to make a movie. And 31 is, for me, a rather soulless endeavor of him going back to an exploitive cinematic style where he's throwing gimmicky villains at you that really don't have any purpose outside of to be a gimmicky villain. And there's no characters I like in that movie. It's got moments. Richard Brake as Doomhead, that opening sequence where he's talking to the camera, phenomenal way to open a film.
Right.
Tanks for the rest of the film. By the time it reaches the end and they bring him back, it's too little, too late. And I can't get into that movie at all.
Whereas I barely remember it. I saw it and I was like, this is him kind of doing a Saw or like a Collector, something in that kind of headspace. And it's exactly like you say, it's not him, really. It's not his style. It was almost too modern a film style for his taste. It was passionless. It was a completely passionless film.
Yeah, and I think what even made it worse was when I saw the film 31 for the first time. I actually saw it at Sundance. They only screened it once for the Sundance crowd. Sold out showing. I had to buy my tickets way ahead of time. I was really excited coming off of Lords of Salem. I was like, what's Rob Zombie going to do next? And this is what we got. And what almost made it worse was the crowd loved it. They just ate that movie up. They were laughing. They were totally into it, and I totally wasn't. I was completely disconnected from it. I wanted to like it, just didn't.
I always loathe that feeling when you're in a theater too, because when you're in a theater hating a movie and everybody, like, literally everyone else is loving it, you feel like you're taking crazy pills. It's like, what am I not seeing? Are we watching different movies?
Oh yeah, totally agree. That it's such a weird feeling. In 31, and like you said, there is a modern feeling to that film, and it's in the editing, and I think the editing is trash. The circus scene with the two clowns with the chainsaws is completely incomprehensible in how it's edited, and it's completely frustrating.
It's somehow, yeah, it's somehow completely unlike anything you've ever seen, and yet completely generic
At the same time, which
at the
is
same
perplexing.
time.
So yeah,
All
that's
right.
my choice for the bad. 31.
And rolling on, what is your choice for the weird?
So my choice for the weird is also technically, I think it's his worst film. So even though I don't like 31, I think it's the bad. I think my expectations make that one feel worse for me than it actually is. My choice for the weird is The Haunted World of El Super Beasto.
Hey, Jinx, my choice for the weird is The Haunted World of El Super Beasto.
All right, so let's discuss whatever the fuck this movie is.
So I call it an R. Crumb style adult cartoon, and I think I know what he was going for, which he wanted his own kind of haunted house, funhouse version of Felix the Cat. But it's in weird because not only is it bad, it's just fucking insane. It's like a luchador up against his nemesis, Deep Sigh, Dr. Satan again.
Yeah, I agree. It's this Ren and Stimpy style influenced like 90s style cartoon. It's animated, which is not unusual for Rob Zombie. So I was actually relatively excited when he first announced that he was doing an animated film. His style of animation is really interesting.
Yeah.
And I think I really wanted that film to be something other than it is. And as it goes, it's the jokes are 1,000 miles an hour. Not very few of them land.
All dick and fart jokes.
Yeah,
And you expect it to be so much more because, again, this is the man that wrote why don't you like clowns rant, which is legitimately hilarious in the middle of a very dark movie. And I don't know that I remember a single joke in any of El Super Beasto landing.
and there's most of it doesn't. Most of it is just like you said. It's toilet humor for the sake of toilet humor. And I like Rob Zombie as a director. As a writer, he's incredibly problematic. And part of that is he takes bold choices, but his dialogue, a lot like his lyrical content, is almost nonsensical. He loves to put things together that he thinks sound cool,
Mm-hmm.
and when he tries to deliver that, it doesn't always land.
Whereas
It's
he, I think he also, because I totally agree with that, but I think he also suffers that 80s, 90s Stephen King problem of never ending anything. Everything just tapers off.
yeah.
Like, you got the Devil's Rejects, which I don't mean to keep harping on it, but that's a real solid ending until it wasn't. And then, and then everything since I even liked Lords of Salem, not as much as you did, but I did like it. But even that just stops. Like,
Yeah. Well, and Lords of Salem in its third act almost Rob Zombies all over itself, which
yeah,
almost ruins it. Because of the weird dreamlike logic it goes into, and then it starts using like nightmarish imagery where it's combining elements from previous in the film into like one sequence, and it literally feels like a music video at that point where she's riding a stuffed goat, and it that doesn't work necessarily as well for me as the rest of the movie. But I think you're absolutely right. He has some trouble kind of finishing things off. And I think The Haunted World of El Superbeasto was one of these, like, I think we can get away with some of this weird shit and we're going to try to. And just none of it really works for me. It's been 10 years since it's been released. I actually watched it this last weekend for this podcast in a hope to like revisit it and see if my feelings were still valid for it. And I actually liked it less, partially because it's incredibly dated now. It was dated when it came out. 10 years down the road, it's incredibly dated. As I'm watching it, they make a joke where El Superbeasto gets a phone call from his agent, which one of the jokes that does land is the fact that it's "No More Arigato, Mr. Roboto" is his ringtone, which is this weird reference. So he answers his phone and he loses a pilot to the kid from Malcolm in the Middle.
Oh, Jesus.
And you're like, where that joke does not age well whatsoever. And you're like, where did that come from? That happens time and time again. There's pop culture references that don't work. The animation style is just off the charts. I mean, you have weird background visual jokes that are meant to be there. Lots of Shining references. Obviously, Otis Driftwood from House of a Thousand Corpses and The Devil's Rejects shows up briefly in it. So does Sid Haig's. Captain Spaulding shows up in it. And I don't know. It just, none of it works for me. It is my choice for the weird simply because what the fuck?
Because that's it. Matter of fact, it could have just as easily gone in my bad, and I almost considered it. I almost made my wild my weird, which will make sense in a second because we're about to move there. But that's exactly kind of where I land on El Superbeasto. I can't even hate it because I'm too busy going, what the fuck was anybody involved even? Paul Giamatti is in this fucking movie.
as the aforementioned heavy sigh, Dr. Satan.
It's just unbelievable. All right, so we did touch on your wild for a moment. So for mine, my wild card, I decided I wanted to rant on my other weird, which is Halloween 2.
Oh, yes. I was hoping we would talk about this, as I've got a lot to say about Halloween 2.
Because I'm choosing Halloween 2 because I'm one of those people that actually really likes Zombies remake of the original. And I really respect the effort to change gears and go in a surreal direction with it. It has like a borderline natural born killers kind of 90s coke-fueled energy while maintaining Zombies' 70s grunge horror aesthetic. The movie just makes no goddamn sense, and it doesn't work because the theming and plot are completely at odds. It's trying to do this like theming about an internal darkness while just trying to be a standard slasher sequel, and they don't meet at any point. It makes no sense. It's an interesting effort. It's not a good one, but it deserves wildcard status, and it deserves to be talked about because it is an interesting effort. And there's some really good kills in it, at least.
In my binge of watching Rob Zombie movies, I rewatched Halloween 2. Again, a film I hadn't seen since theaters way back in the day. And Halloween 2 is a fascinating film, and I don't disagree with you choosing it as a wild card choice. I think that works for it because it is a movie that takes some bold choices, bold swings of a bat for a slasher franchise, and simply misses so many of them. And I have to give it credit for taking some swings. But as I'm watching it, it dawns on me that the first 20 minutes, and again, here's a little bit of spoiler territory just in case anybody hasn't seen it. The first 20 minutes is a complete red herring sequence. So it's the most perplexing choice to make a 20-minute red herring sequence that's a reference to the original Halloween 2 that features one of the stupidest moments in modern horror history, where the ambulance hits a cow on the road and that's how he escapes, while the two drivers are arguing about necrophilia and whether or not it's funny. They randomly hit a cow and it comes out of nowhere. One of the characters is just like, cow, bam, they hit it. Might be the stupidest moment in modern horror history, and yet that first 20 minutes is still the best part of that movie. The hospital sequence is really intense. It works for me. You get a weird, brief cameo performance from Octavia Spencer
National goddamn treasure, Octavia Spencer.
as the nurse who gets killed by Michael Myers.
That
And she shows up randomly in this movie as a nurse who gets brutally slaughtered by Michael Myers. The sequence where Laurie is hiding in the security bunker and Michael is like ripping through the walls of it, really intense. And then you realize it's like all of this is just a red herring, and then the real movie, I just put up air quotes for those listening, a real movie starts after that, and it's like everyone is misunderstood, so everyone has dreadlocks. And I just, that, like, it's such a weird movie in that choice. Again, like you said, you know what, tip of the hat to Rob Zombie for making bold choices with it. I would have been more interested to see what bold choices he would have made if he didn't have to follow the formula.
As a matter of fact, I would have almost been more interested to see his version of Halloween 3, because the most interesting idea he has is the ending of Halloween 2, which he's pushing for the whole time, which is to make Laurie a killer. And it doesn't make any goddamn sense, but boy, I'd have watched another movie of it.
And that's fair. And that's kind of what cult cinema.
I mean, there are other weird. You didn't even get into the fact that she sees fucking visions of ghost Sherry Moon Zombie, her mother, throughout the movie. Like, it's so bizarre. It is just a bizarre movie. But bold choices.
Yeah, bold choices. And I think you bring up a good point, because it's hard to talk about Rob Zombie movies and his filmography without bringing up Sherry Moon Zombie. And I'm a little perplexed we haven't brought her up until now. And so it's funny because she's actually gotten better as an actress. There's a lot of people that hate her out there.
The biggest problems with House of a Thousand Corpses, matter of fact, is specifically her performance and how central it is to the movie. Thank God she got better thank God he realized Otis was a much more interesting character by Devil's Rejects.
Well, and Otis is a more interesting character and a completely different character.
Yeah.
and
between the two movies, yeah, he completely retconned him out and was like, nah.
Well, and
boy, that's that whole speech about I'm the devil, I'm here to do the devil's work. That is scary shit. Like, that whole sequence is terrifying. And I'm losing the actor's name.
Bill Moseley.
Bill Moseley, yeah. Bill Moseley is just, I made a comment about how, like, after watching that movie, I feel the need to shower. Most of that is his hair. But him and Sid Haig really go all the way with it, and they're willing to be just frankly disgusting, like both physically and as people. But again, we're talking about Sherry Moon Zombie, who she's not as willing to kind of experiment. She kind of has one speed, which is like goth-manic pixie girl.
Well, and I think she gets better with time. I agree.
She's Salem, actually. She's weirdly reasonably decent for the 3 seconds she's in Tobe Hooper's Toolbox Murders. Forgotten zombie film she was in.
Yeah, I forgot she was in that. But you're right. That's really funny. Yeah, I don't know. I just like her. I like her in Lords of Salem. I think she gets to strut a lot of her stuff where she's not dropping F-bombs every other word, or focusing on being this almost like shrill person that she is as Baby.
That's that baby voice thing, yeah.
Yeah, and it's I think it was supposed to be creepy in House of a Thousand Corpses, and I get that. I mean, again, dibs to Devil's Rejects for retconning a lot of what was wrong with House of a Thousand Corpses, improving Otis's character, weaving in Captain Spaulding into the mix a little bit more, and then getting rid of Dr. Satan completely. There's not even like a reference to it, which is
if you ever go through the DVD and watch the special features, there is a Dr. Satan scene filmed in the movie in its more realistic style. I shit you not.
What? I didn't know this. Okay, I might have to go dig into that.
Yeah, no, for real. Look at the DVD. Yeah, he's like in a hospital bed. It's basically his dying moments or whatever. Just treating him like he's a 1,000-year-old man or something. Boy, never even mentioned he's like a Nazi scientist. It's a whole thing.
Of course, he's a Nazi scientist. Weirdly enough. Rob Zombie puts a lot of Nazi stuff into
They
his
did
movies.
retcon it out because I think Rob Zombie realized that was kind of part of the problem with House of a Thousand Corpses, or he had a smart editor on it, or something was going on. But that scene was shot. He wanted to. He really loves that Dr. Satan. He's in 3 from Hell. I'm gonna fucking walk out. I swear to God.
Yeah, and that brings up, I guess we should kind of cap this off and bring up that one of the reasons I wanted to do Rob Zombie was 3 from Hell is coming out. And after 31, I don't have a lot of high expectations for it, particularly because of how good the ending for Devil's Rejects is. How he's going to kind of retcon that.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure how he's going to do it.
One of the things that really works for me about Devil's Rejects is I put so much emphasis on human evil. A lot of Rob Zombie stuff has that supernatural element. Like Michael Myers, no matter how many times they reboot him, no matter what they do, you're never going to make him a not supernatural force. He's just not. And that's one of the things that's interesting about Devil's Rejects. These are just shitty people. They drive at a wall of cops, they die badly. Like, that is one of the things that strongly works for me. So yeah, I got questions, and I have like a weird bad feeling there's a supernatural element in this one to kind of work through it. And I don't know, I don't want to cast doubt or anything, but I'm kind of right there with you. I want to be excited for this movie, being my passion for Devil's Rejects, but I'm just not.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat. I'm not sure how I feel about it. I want to like it because, like I said, I have a weird love for House of a Thousand Corpses, despite its many flaws. And I like The Devil's Rejects, even though it didn't make my list anywhere. The Devil's Rejects is, as far as I'm concerned, his second best film. I just prefer Lords of Salem stylistically. But yeah, 3 from Hell just is, it's a huge, I should have put it as my wild card choice because I feel like it's his biggest wild card in a long time. And again, I think after 31 was kind of that throwback to his old style as to appease the fans. I think 3 from Hell is a continuation of that, and I'm not so sure it's under the best intentions, but we'll see.
Yeah.
All right. So, anything else you wanted to touch on about Rob Zombies? I find it very interesting. We did not bring up the first Halloween. I mean, you briefly mentioned that you thought you really like it. I don't like it as much, but that's really interesting. But yeah, is there anything else you wanted to touch on Rob Zombie before we kind of wrap this up?
I mean, I definitely feel like he should probably see a therapist. The dude definitely has mommy issues. No, actually, like, jokes aside, not only does he kind of have a writing problem, he has trouble writing for not white men.
Yes.
Like any female, any person of color, anything like that in any of his movies, and you're just like gritting your teeth going, oh shit. It's weirdly like watching a Tarantino movie in that way. Like, it's really compelling when he's when he's on, but then you see even in Devil's Rejects, he comes up to their friend. I'm totally losing his name, but just instantly you're like, oh, this is gonna take a turn for a minute.
Yeah, well, and he has it, like you've said, his writing has a tendency to fluctuate. And even in Devil's Rejects, their sequences, I would be like, you need to cut this. This doesn't need to be here. Their friend who runs the brothel, played by Ken Foree, there's the sequence where they go to buy chickens, and they have this whole thing about the farmer asks them if they're gonna have sex with the chickens. And I'm like, why is this here? There's like 5 or 7 minutes of this discussion that I'm like, okay. I mean, it's one thing to have your villains talk that way, but it's another thing to have this random conversation that doesn't need to be there.
And this is the same, because this is the same movie where you have like an incredibly intense sequence in a hotel room where Otis is literally torturing this family. And then they're going to talk about fucking chickens like an hour later. And it's just, yeah, there's a lot of whiplash to his writing sometimes.
Yeah. And that's the one thing about his entire filmography, whether I love it, I hate it, it's weird, it's wild, it's a little bit of all of those. Every film has a little bit of each. And it makes his stuff interesting. It's what kind of makes him a controversial figure. And part of that is like, as much as whether I love it or hate it, the horror cinema world needs somebody like Rob Zombie to kind of come in and stir the pot a little, even when he's at his worst.
Yeah, no, to me, my absolute final word on him personally is kind of along the lines of what you're saying, but the one word we never used at any point in this was boring. Rob Zombie, even at his worst, it's not boring. There's always something to look at on screen. The music's usually good. Even I'll pop on House of a Thousand Corpses every once in a while. It's just a long music video for a forgotten album, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. Well, and even when he's not doing the music himself or using other ones, I actually think probably the one thing that works in the haunted world of El Super Bisto is the songs, those original songs that are in it. There's a song about the Nazi zombie chase where they're literally just explaining what's happening on screen, which ends up being way funnier than anything that's actually happening on screen. Is the fact there's this like weird kind of folky song that's happening that's talking about it. So his use of music has always been kind of a highlight of his, and I think even going into like my weird hatred for the movie 31 has some really good music in it. The way that it uses it is really strong, so it works. All right.
Oh, so that is Rob Zombie. This was The Good, the Bad, the Weird, the Wild. Be sure to listen to our next episode of No Franchise Fatigue featuring Park Chan-wook's Revenge Trilogy. And do you have anyone you'd like us to talk about? Hit us up at bloodbrothersreviews@yahoo.com. And speaking of, Matt and I are both writers at Blood Brothers Review.
bloodbrothersfilmreviews.blogspot.com.